Today's episode of the Counselling Tutor Podcast is sponsored by Web Healer. You're a counsellor in private practice and you need a website, or you've got an existing website which you need help with. Web Healer are offering Counselling Tutor Podcast listeners, that's you, £100 off the cost of a website design and build. Now, Web Healers specialise in websites for counsellors and psychotherapists. It's what they do. And the Web Healer team provide a completely non-technical, done-for-you solution, leaving you to focus your time on your clients. Operating for 20 years, Web Healer are a trusted resource amongst counsellors when it comes to getting your practice online. So get the package details and claim your £100 off coupon for your new website by going to counsellingtutor.com/website. That's counsellingtutor.com/website.
Welcome to the Counselling Tutor Podcast, the must-listen-to podcast for students of counselling and psychotherapy. Here are your hosts, Rory Lees-Oakes and Ken Kelly.
Hi, I'm Rory, and with me, as always, is Ken. How are you doing, Ken? How are you doing?
Exceptionally well. Thank you for asking, Rory. Hope that you're well too, Rory, and both Rory and I hope that you listening to us today on the Counselling Tutor Podcast are well too. You've joined us at episode 261. 3 topics of discussion today, starting off with that theory and practice, how the cold theory applies itself in the day-to-day running of a counselling practice. And today, talking of assessment in the counselling practice. Then in practice today, we have a special guest. It's Dara McLaughlin from Web Healer. Rory met up with Dara to speak about the difference between a do-it-yourself DIY website build versus a professionally built website, getting a professional to do that for you. So lots to look forward to in that one, either if you're looking to update your website or you need a website. Good info there. And then into Practice Matters, that's our CPD section, where Rory reached out to the National Counselling Society, spoke with Rachel King from Professional Conduct Officer and Meg Moss, the Head of Policy and Public Affairs, and the topic is professional conduct procedures. So that's what we have to look forward to in this episode, starting us off with how that theory comes alive in practice, and we're speaking assessments in counselling, Rory.
Yes, and I think this is quite an important topic. There's going to be a lot of people listening who are going into practice, into placement for the first time. And, you know, I always say this in every podcast. When I started, it was just a case of you went in, you picked the client was given to you, and then you met them in the therapy room or greeted them in the hall, as it was in my practice. You went into the therapy room and you started your practice. But things have moved on considerably in the last few years, and assessment is now a part of a lot of students' work. And when I talk of assessment, what I'm talking about is maybe using things like Core 10 forms, where you're asked to fill those in at the commencement of therapy, or PHQ-9 forms, where you fill them in at the commencement of therapy. And you may fill them in, you know, during the review stage, 6-session review, and at the end. And I think there's a lot of people who think that they're just really for funders. They're just to show that the client's progressed and the agency can bring the funding down. But actually, you know, assessment is about using those forms correctly. And I think if someone's taught to use Core 10, it can be really, really helpful in being able to identify very, very quickly what the client's issue is. And sometimes when the client goes to see and is initially assessed, usually by a more experienced therapist, and then the clients are filtered, and they're filtered into students with the requisite skills and knowledge to work with them. Sometimes what's been spoke about at initial assessment, i.e. when they first come to the agency, and what's spoke about in the therapy room are two different things. And as a consequence of that, using a Core 10 or a PHQ-9 form can really be useful. But here's the thing, you need training on them. It's not just a case of filling them in and putting them one side. They need to be interpreted. And what I'm hoping is that those of you who are using them are getting the support to be able to use them properly.
Yeah, I think that's important. We speak about it all the time. It's about that CPD. It's looking to learn to better serve. And if you are a member of the Counselling Study Resource or a member of our Counsellor CPD library, we've got a phenomenal lecture that was done by John Mellor Clark, who was one of the founders of CORE, and he speaks in depth about the process and the assessment process. So if you are a member, go and log in and have a look at that. And I just wanted to start this off, I think, from my side, Rory, with a definition. And this is a definition taken from a book, Watson and Flem's. I hope I've put that correctly. It's FLAMEZ, 2015. Assessment is the process by which counsellors gather the information they need to form a holistic view of their clients and the problems with which they present. I think it goes on further that it can also be used as a form of measurement as therapy goes on. It can be a check to check that the client is getting what they need from therapy, and of course it's a check to make sure that our competence level matches what a client might be looking for from therapy when they present. And the kind of information that we might gather in a holistic assessment are the presenting issues, the personal history of the person coming into counselling, any key relationships that we need to know about or what kind of support that client may have outside of the therapy room, health and lifestyle issues or challenges that they may be facing, any medical and psychiatric history that may affect counselling, the outcomes of counselling, psychological contact, any kind of medication that might be prescribed there. Ethnicity, sexuality, gender, and disabilities are something that we do look at, and they're asked for on those tools that Rory has mentioned. And then maybe previous experience of therapy. Did the client engage with a different therapist? And how was that for them? Was that a match? Was that not a match? And why was that? And then, of course, we might ask the client's goals, the all-important question, what is it that you're looking for from engaging in therapy? And of course those kind of questions, that kind of information is something that we would do in an assessment as that client is coming in, as well as assessing the risk profile of that client, and all of that forms into an assessment.
Absolutely. And I think I want to be clear, assessment isn't diagnosis.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes there's a bit of a confusion there. Assessment is getting all the information that you can, relevant information about the client, so you can do two things. A, help with the client identify what they want to work on.
Yep.
And B, assess if your competence level matches what the client's expectations are. And this is so important. One of the trends I've noticed in recent years, certainly speaking with supervisees, is that clients, even if they're coming into an agency setting for what we describe as, and I'm using the inverted commas as we speak for those who are not watching on YouTube, free therapy, they are wanting specific outcomes. Clients are becoming more clear about what they want to work with. And as such, we have to meet them where they're at. And if we haven't got the skill set to try to meet their aspirations, we cannot affect a cure. We can't guarantee there's going to be a great outcome. But at least we need to be competent enough to be able to work with the client, with the issue they present. Then that's going to give us a sense of, can we work with the client? Is our skill set a good match for the client's need? And also, how do we refer on if it's not? And I have to say, in my career, I have done a fair few referrals where the client has come along and asked me, and I've thought to myself, I'm not skilled enough. I don't have that specific skill set. Couples counselling is a good example of that. I don't do couples work because I'm not couples trained. That's a very simple kind of example. So we need to be assessing all the time. And as you said, rightly so, Ken, risk. Because risk can present itself in the therapy room at any time, and we need to have our assessment radar on.
I think it's we've got to recognise there's pros and cons to assessment. When we say assessment, you're going to have a camp, you're going to have a position, and I think it's worthwhile just going over some of the pros and cons. So from the pro side, one of the things we get from an assessment is we do get a lot of information in a short amount of time. that can be very helpful to us, understanding the client and, of course, understanding what the client is looking for and understanding the client's circumstances. It can actually bring structure to the work. So often we see posted in the Facebook group about the dread of that first session. What am I going to say? First client, first session. Well, the assessment is kind of a way of maybe easing in there because you do have a structure to follow in that first session. Also, and this is interesting, I think, that you can use assessment as a way of building rapport. Now, if you go through an assessment form without the training and it's a box-ticking exercise, it can seem really cold and clinical, like you're firing questions at a person. But if it's done warmly, with a real unconditional positive regard to that person and with empathy, it can be a way of opening up key areas, building that rapport as you're asking and engaging in a dialogue with that client. As you've already mentioned, Rory, one of the big pros here is it allows us to kind of look at our competence and say, am I the right therapist for this client presentation? Do I need to refer on? As you've mentioned, Rory, another big pro is it gives us an opportunity to assess risk and have that documented. We can then take that to supervision or speak to peers if we have any uncertainty about that. So it highlights it and it puts it down, documented, which I think is really important. It allows clients and counsellors to see and measure progress. If you're using one of the tools Rory has mentioned, you may be asking questions on a session-by-session basis and doing an assessment, short assessment on a session-by-session basis. And that can really show for you, for the client, that progress. And as you said in the very beginning, Rory, sometimes it helps with funding as well.
Yeah.
And it gives us an insight into aspects of the life of this client, anything that might be negatively influencing who they are. It might be mental health, it might be alcohol, drugs, being a carer, on certain kind of medication. So there's some pros that kind of stand, I guess, in favor of that assessment process. But we've got to recognize, but there are cons as well. You know, you might have a client who has been through a lot of services and they get in front of you and it's, oh no, not another assessment. I've got to go through all these questions that I've asked before. It may create a power imbalance because it, by the very nature that you've got the assessment in front of you, you are the one asking that question. Is that a power imbalance? It can lead to a client operating from an external locus of evaluation, what other people think of them rather than their internal valuing system. It can interpret the process and or the relationship, interrupt, not interpret. I'm reading here from some slides we have of a great lecture that is in our CPD lecture, so I apologize. It can interrupt the process. You know, I'm a client, I've come in, I've got this information, I'm now going to get an opportunity to share it, and now the counsellor is going to speak to me for 10 minutes asking me questions, and they can feel maybe a little bit intrusive if you're asking a person about their medical history, if you're asking about mental health history, if you're asking them questions that they can feel uncomfortable about. And I guess one of the cons is that the client may not be honest. We haven't built that rapport, we haven't built that trust. So are they honest with us when they're coming in, or are they just going through a process? And of course, taking that into consideration, one of the cons is if it is not administered properly, the outcomes can be misleading. If we're maybe doing on a session-to-session basis and asking how the client is going on, maybe they don't want to disappoint us. They're operating from that external locus of evaluation. I don't want you to let you down. You're doing a great job. Thank you, counsellor. Yes, I'm getting better. When really that's not how it is for them. So there's just some of the pros and cons.
Yes, and I think, like with anything in counselling practice, everything has to be delivered in a thoughtful way. So I'll pick up on that very important topic that you covered, Ken, which was the client being fatigued by having to tell the same story again and again. Certainly, if it's a story that involves trauma and reliving that trauma. So that's very important. That I think, and I've changed my mind in recent years, the last 10 years, I've had a change of mind about this, is if you get a referral pack your referrer to read it and to get the sense of where this client is. When I first started, I always thought that I'd want to see the client fresh without anybody's interpretation and meet the client where they were. But the more I've thought about it and more I've spoke about this in supervision and with colleagues, the more I'm now leaning to, use the referral as a base and then work with the client. And so sometimes I might say to a client, so I've read what you've talked to the referrer about. Is that what you want to discuss? And if they say yes, then you've got pretty much the background already. You don't have to go over that old ground with the client, and and then you can take that as a starting point. It might be they just say no, I've actually come about this. In which case, again, it's a win because the client has got a voice and they can speak about what they want. And I also think that we don't want to get too bogged down with being administrators. The client's time, and certainly with, the way therapy is delivered, certainly in voluntary areas at some point, it can be short engagements, 6, maybe 12 sessions. We don't want to tie the client's time up by filling endless paperwork in. But I do think there is a balance. And I also think it's a really good discipline to develop that assessment part of your practice, to be able to, on the hop, think, is there a risk here? Is there something else that the client might need? To be able to go to supervision and be able to say, this is what I'm thinking. And for the supervisor to be able to kind of get a really good overview of the client. Certainly that's really important in early practice, because you're not going to have the experience to make those connections yourself. As a new practitioner, you may have 2 or 3 bits of information that the client's given you, and they're just 2 or 3 bits of information. You go to supervision and they join the dots.
Yes.
They join the dots. And even now in my supervision, that's still the same. I will say, the client's presented this, and then my supervisor may say, so maybe they could be looking at, and I go, oh yeah, right, yeah. So that's why supervision is so helpful. But I think assessment it's going to be more and more part of practice as we go forward. And I also think it provides an evidence base to say that we're working competently. And I'm sure there'll be some people listening here saying, I don't need assessment to prove I work competently, and I accept that principle placed. But I do think in a time where we're becoming more and more accountable, having being able to show an initial assessment and the progress through that, I think is really, really useful. That's my view. That's the view I've come to at this point.
Yeah, I think I've got to agree with you there, Rory. And, this is definitely, wherever you stand on assessment, this is an important topic for consideration. And Rory's provided a super duper handout, Assessing Clients. It's a PDF download. You can get that by going to counsellingtutor.com. That's our mother website. Just find your way to the podcast page. You'll find it right there in the menu at the top of the page. Navigate to episode 261. Right there on that page, you can download Assessing Clients PDF. It's a free download. If you are a member of the Counselling Study Resource or the Counsellor CPD Library, jump in to your membership area and just pop in a search for the word assessment. You'll see we've got a number of different articles, topic and resources, including experts speaking on it. Great lecture on assessments in counselling by Emma Chapman, and I've already mentioned John Mellor-Clark, one of the founders of CORE, speaking about the CORE tool in depth and what the research is showing them. Really, really interesting stuff. Can't recommend that highly enough. If you're listening to this and wondering what is the Counselling Study Resource or the CPD Library, that means you're not a member. Just go to counsellingtutor.com. All the information is right there on that page. And that brings us to the end of Theory in Practice. Theory to Practice is proudly sponsored by CounsellingSkillsAcademy.com. I'm Ken Kelly, and I've got a real burning passion for counselling skills. I've built training that takes the doubt out of using counselling skills. You get to see the counselling skills used in real live sessions by a qualified therapist. Full sessions, real material, real counselling skills. To find out more, go to counsellingskillsacademy.com. We now move on to practice today, where we look at something contemporary, something that's going on right now. And we're living in a digital revolution. There's no doubt about it. There's so much about AI, data protection. It's the technology is changing all the time. And a website is something that shows who we are, what we do. And of course, there's so many different options for websites. So many hosting companies have little templates that you can make your own website there at relatively low cost. So those are the do-it-yourself website builds. But then you might go to a web developer and have a website developed professionally. Which is the right way to go? Is it prohibitively expensive going out to a web developer? All these are questions we need to consider. And that's why you, Rory, reached out to Dara McLaughlin from Web Healer to speak about DIY versus professionally built websites.
Absolutely. And this is a topic that's been quite hot in our Facebook page recently. Lots of people talking about, is it better to make a DIY website or go to a professional website developer to have one custom made. And if you're not a member of our Facebook group, type in Counselling Tutor into Facebook. You'll find us. We're a closed group, but knock on the door and our friendly moderator will let you in, and you can join thousands and thousands of like-minded people talking about the world of counselling and psychotherapy. We have students, we have qualified colleagues, supervisors, tutors, and they're all talking about all the topics that really are spoken about in the world of counselling and psychotherapy. And as Ken has said on a number of occasions, we're not experts in this, so we've reached out to an expert. I caught up with Dara McLaughlin and asked the question, is DIY a better option than having a purpose-built website made by a website developer? And this is what he had to say. One of the questions that gets asked a huge amount in our Facebook group is professional websites for therapists. Those people are in private practice who have decided to advertise their skills and their practice to a wider audience. And I'm delighted to welcome back Darren McLaughlin from webhealer.net, whose company builds professional websites. We heard from him in episode 241 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast, but he's here again, this time to talk about the difference between DIY websites and having one professionally built. The question being, is it more cost effective to do it yourself or to get a professional in? So Dara, so welcome back. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Rory, and hi to all the listeners today.
Yes. So I guess the first question is, I guess everybody thinks they're a graphic designer and that they will design their website. If they're doing it themselves, of course, it's just to get a few pictures off the internet or a picture library and you're away. I guess the question is, can you build your website better than a professional designer? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, listen, that's a great question. And it's a subject matter of many conversations we have with counsellors up and down the UK, in fact, every week. I mean, first of all, when you're in private practice, you're a sole practitioner. You're out there on your own. You typically do a lot of your accounts yourself. You obviously do your in-person, face-to-face or online sessions with your own clients. You manage every element of your business. And so when it comes to getting a website, it's only natural that entrepreneurial spirit shines through and you say, you know what, I think I can do this myself. But Rory, speaking to people, we understand that really there's no benefit in the long term to doing it. And I'd like to talk today about a couple of different topics that shines a light on those problems. And just kind of educate the listeners a little bit more about why you should possibly choose a professional designer over going it alone. Okay, so
I think that's a great introduction. And you're absolutely right. That entrepreneurial spirit of, I can do my accounts, so, I can do lots of things in the business. But I guess the question that goes on to is why choose a professional website designer, company that designs, does this as their day job rather than going it alone? What are the benefits of hiring you effectively, Dara?
Well, let's break it down into a couple of topics, Rory. But the first thing, I suppose, the key is in the name, web design, and the term design. It's incredibly important. When somebody lands on your website, the first thing they see is your design. And so when you go it alone and you use some of these online tools to build a website, which, let me say, are fantastic, and they've made the web very accessible for a lot of people. But at the same time, you're somewhat limited by what you can do in terms of the design. So by your profession, you're a counselor, you're in the business of helping people. You're not in the business of designing websites in a visually appealing and user-friendly manner. And so the key difference is when a professional designer designs your website, they're translating you and information about your practice into an easily digestible, readable, user-friendly format online that hopefully entices potential clients to reach out and make contact. And so as a sole practitioner, it can be hard to step away from your own practice. And what you might think might be appealing to people might not necessarily be, or your design taste. You might say, well, that looks fantastic, but really, will the wider audience and your potential clients share the same opinion? And a job of a good designer is to translate you and your practice and how you work and all your nuances into a website that when somebody sees it, they says, yeah, that's Rory there, 100%. I can work with that person. I'm going to reach out and make contact. So design and that visual representation of your practice is probably the most important thing that a designer can do better than you. And that's not a negative thing. That's just reality. That's their profession, and the team we have here, that's all they do day in, day out. They build websites for therapists in the UK.
That's yes, and I was just, when I was hearing that, I was smiling to myself, Dara, because I thought, you wouldn't expect to get therapy from a website designer.
Well, look, I didn't want to say it, Rory, but again, and this is the beauty of the internet today. As we all know, we hear about AI and what AI can do and how it can make our lives easier and so on. And listen, it's been fantastic for the internet to see these tools come on and to make it more accessible, because not every business it can get away with a small website. Some business need big websites, and it may be cost prohibitive for them to go out there and to pay someone to do it. And so these tools, they slot in nicely in those departments, but still there are limitations. So yeah, absolutely, you wouldn't get counselling online from a designer. From a designer,
yeah. So there's a sense there, maybe with great respect to people, the horses for courses analogy. And I guess the other thing is, and this is something we see in Counselling Tutor a lot, functionality. Websites have different sorts of functionalities. Can you say a little bit about why it's important to have a website design that has functionality and one that I guess the users can engage with?
Yeah, I mean, I always see a website as a tool, but also it's almost like a colleague or a shadow in your practice. It should be working for you and alongside you. It should be making your life easier. It should be cutting down on your marketing spend. It should be bringing clients to your phone, to your email inbox. And so when you put together a website, you mightn't be aware necessarily of the tools that you can use in the website to really get it working hard for you. So I don't mean, a nicely built website alone isn't going to bring in traffic. You want something that makes scheduling maybe an introductory call with you easier. So for example, I know a lot of our customers, they offer a quick 10, 15 minute session by phone just to see if the potential client is the right fit for them, and if they're the right fit for the client, and so on and so forth. And there's tools out there like Calendly and calendar systems where you can integrate them into your website quite easily, if you know how, in order to really leverage the technology and make your workflow easier. Obviously, there's email forms, very simple, but sometimes people don't have them configured correctly. Sometimes people will come to us and say, you know what, I have this email form on my website that I built myself and I don't get any inquiries through it. And when we go digging for them, it turns out they don't have it configured correctly. And it's just an honest mistake, Rory. It's something that any of us can make. But ultimately, it means that your website isn't working as hard as it could for you. So that functionality is there, small little things you can drop in, which you might not be aware of. And again, a designer who's doing this day in, day out, they know the tools, the tricks of the trade, so to speak. And so they can help you put together a website that's really going to work hard and bring you clients. Ultimately, that's what it's all about at the end of the day.
Absolutely. And I think with having a bespoke website, it's like having a bespoke piece of clothing, you can draw off a wide range of tools where, in my experience working with off the peg website designs, the ones you find on the internet, they can be a bit restricted in the kind of tools that you can add in. Whereas a bespoke one, you speak to the website designer, and they can put in a wider range of tools or customize them in a way that would suit you. One of the other aspects that websites, it's sometimes a bit of a mystical art, isn't it? SEO, which effectively means getting your website found when somebody puts in a search. And navigating Google's a bit of a dark art, we've discovered, because they don't actually make it very easy. They don't tell you, Google or any of the search engines, how to get higher in the rankings. You kind of have to work it out for yourself. Not always easy, and I would imagine having a professional to help you is going to be a great help there.
Well, look, we're in a very fortunate position, Rory. We have a good view on what works and what doesn't work. And that's born out of experience over almost 20 years now, building websites for counsellors and psychotherapists in private practice in the UK. But also, when Google makes a change, as it does quite regularly, we can see the impact of that change. So we can tailor our website building style accordingly. So Google does look out for certain things. And frankly, if you're not in the business of keeping abreast of the trends that, exist out there in SEO land, you're not going to know these things. You're not going to implement them in your website, and you're going to come up short. Google has only one page that matters, which is page 1. And there's usually only a maximum of 10 results there. And if you share that page with anybody who knows the ins and outs of SEO or is, hired a professional to help them with this area, ultimately they're going to come out ahead of you. And I think we'll all know from our own experience that when we're Googling a particular key phrase or key topic, usually we don't go outside the first 3 to 5 results. So if you're not in, you can't win. You need to be up there in, the first few results. But most importantly, Google does change its ranking algorithms. That is how it positions websites on an ongoing basis. And if you're not familiar with that and you can't tailor your website accordingly and also include these key data points that Google wants you to have on your page, if you miss those out, you're not going to appear. And, at the end of the day, a website that's not on page 1 is like a guard dog without bark, so you're going to miss out ultimately. And you don't want to be in that position, because ultimately your colleagues are going to be investing in that area and winning the clients, frankly.
Yes, and let me just share with you that Counselling Tutor, anybody who found our podcast by searching for podcast or searching for a topic, we put a huge amount of time and effort into search engine optimization, or SEO, which is why we're always at the top of the searches on Google. And I have to tell you, it's not an easy task. It is a very, very specialized field, and one that you need a huge amount of knowledge in, and also you need to have your finger on the pulse of Google, because they do change it on a regular basis. And if you're not up with that, your website can literally disappear off the internet and go from page 1 to page 99, literally overnight. Now, I guess a lot of people might be thinking, well, it's all well and good employing a website designer, but surely, this is going to be a costly exercise where I can do it myself cheaper. Is that necessarily true?
Well, no, is a short answer. I'm glad to report. I mean, look, at web design, the price of web design has certainly changed over the years. There's a lot more designers out there, and certainly there's a lot more companies like ourselves who work in specific areas. Like in our case, we only work specifically for therapists in private practice. So the cost of web design has definitely come down, but the cost of doing it wrong or not up to par is never as high. And it's never as high because your colleagues are going to be in the search. And frankly, previously there weren't as many other therapists with their own websites online, but now there are. And so if you're not online, or if you create a website which Google doesn't give the nod to and position you on page 1, frankly, you're not going to get the traffic, and your colleagues are going to get the clients instead. So, but the real time and cost, I suppose, when you think about how many hours you're going to have to put into this website, and you maybe compare that against maybe client hours that you could be doing in your practice room or online, or maybe even the CPD, the supervision, or even just general R&R, counselling is an incredibly strenuous profession mentally, and you need time to deflate. In the evening time, is sitting down and battling with technology the thing you want to be doing? Probably not. And you'd be surprised when you go out there to price up what a website would cost. It's less than it has been in the past. So we would really encourage people to shop around, see what offers are out there, see who works with therapists, companies like ourselves that have very keen offers for people in private practice to get a website, and weigh that up against the time and the cost, the real cost of building a website, how much effort you're going to put into it, and maybe then the cost of not doing it right at all. So it's like a double cost. So yeah, definitely an area that needs consideration.
Yes, and it could be one of those situations where you think, oh, I can build my own, and then you've built your own, and then you've paid out to build your own, and then you're not getting the results. Then you have to pay out again to have a professionally designed website. So might as well just start with a professionally designed website. And I think that really brings me back to my last question. Time is an important thing in people's lives, and when you're running any sort of a business, and if you're self-employed as a counsellor, you need to think about where your time and effort goes in, where you're making your money from, and how much time you might be wasting, how much downtime you have doing other things. So I'm guessing that having a website professionally built is going to give you more time maybe to spend in what you're good at, which is being a therapist.
Exactly that, Rory. Exactly that. I mean, if it takes a professional web designer 10 hours, let's just say a nice round number, to build your website, start to finish, obviously broken up into segments, consider how long that might take you to do. Would it take twice as long, 3 times as long? And I can almost hear the voices of your listeners saying, 5, 6, 10 times. So you think about that time and what it might take you, and then multiply that by your hourly rate. And I think then it really gives you pause for thought in terms of, is it really good value to go down that route yourself? And as I said at the outset of our conversation, we speak to therapists who've been down that road and who have learned the hard lesson. And I suppose, hopefully, an outcome from today is to tell people there is a different way to go. It's not as expensive as you think. And ultimately, the results for you and your practice will be better in the long run.
Well, there you have it. And if you're interested or in the market for a website and you're thinking of maybe checking out a professionally designed website, if you go to episode 261, this podcast is episode 261. If you go to counsellingtutor.com, click the podcast tab, go to episode 261. We will put some links in to Dara's web healer, which is Dara's business, and you can click on there and you can make contact and maybe reach out and just see what great value having a website built for you is over doing it yourself. So it just remains for me to say, Dara McLaughlin, thank you again for joining us.
Big thank you to Dara McLaughlin from Web Healer, one of the sponsors of the Counselling Tutor podcast. And a big thank you to you, Rory, for reaching out and having that discussion. And if you are interested in learning more about the Web Healer service, go to counsellingtutor.com/website. And you'll notice that Web Healer are offering £100 discount on a brand new website build for counsellors and psychotherapists. They specialize in our area of expertise. That's all they do is build for counsellors and psychotherapists. And I was absolutely bowled over, Rory, when I looked at the price. So for around £178, once you've taken the discount off, you can have a brand new website built by Web Healer, which I think is, for me, is a no-brainer. If you think about the hours going into building it yourself, it would take me a lot more. I'd be working at a lot less than minimum wage if I was building it. So there's a consideration. If you're interested, counsellingtutor.com/website, and you'll be able to see a video of Dara speaking you through what they offer. You can look at the price, and if you wish to take that further, you can book a call and have a chat with their expert team. So there we have it. That is taking us out of practice today, where we look at those contemporary issues, and we now go into Practice Matters. This is the CPD section that you can record as CPD. And Rory, you reached out to National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. Exciting time as they change their name, they change their website. But professional conduct procedure. You spoke with Rachel King, who is the Professional Conduct Officer, and Meg Moss, Head of Policy and Public Affairs.
Yes, absolutely, Ken. It's a double header of interviews today, and continuing our series of interviews with National Counselling, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, opening the curtain on how a professional body operates and the many mechanisms within a professional body. I caught up with Rachel King and Meg Moss. They talked about professional conduct procedure. What happens if a client or someone posts a complaint against you? How does the society work with that and work with you to resolve it? And this is what they had to say.
Practice matters.
Public protection and professional accountability are the bywords for therapists who are in practice. We're joined today by Meg Moss, who's Head of Policy and Public Affairs for the National Counselling Society, and Rachel King, who is the Professional Conduct Officer, to talk about professional conduct and complaints. So, Meg and Rachel, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having us. I mean, I have kind of muscled my way into this podcast. It's not actually my job, but I really like talking about it, and I think it works really well in terms of like policy stuff. So thank you for having me on, sneaking me in.
And thank you for having me too, Rory. Really appreciate it.
Well, it's lovely, and we're always pleased to see anyone from the NCS. So, the pleasure's ours. So, first question, and it seems like an obvious question, but why do we need a complaints process in terms of being a therapist and an ethical body? Why do we need a complaints process?
Well, it's a good question, and I suppose it is the obvious question, but not everyone asks it. And the answer is, I mean, there are lots of different ways of answering that question. There isn't just one answer, there's lots of different reasons. But public protection is the really big one. That's kind of what we talk about in terms of part of being an accredited register holder. One of the things that we really need to make sure is that we're protecting the public. It makes our profession a lot more trustworthy to clients who might be looking for a counsellor, knowing that they have somewhere that they can go if they need any kind of recourse, if something's gone wrong in therapy, or if they're not happy with something that's happened for whatever reason. And it's really about making sure that as counsellors, as psychotherapists, that we're accountable for our actions and the work we do. And it's really just something there to make sure that we are upholding the ethical practices that we hold ourselves to, make sure that we're following those. Yeah, it gives clarity as well to what can be expected from a counsellor and what a client can expect from that relationship as well.
Yeah, and I guess the reality is that counsellors sometimes make mistakes, make errors, or sometimes they act in ways which are not compatible to the ethics and values of the counselling profession.
Yeah, and sometimes as well, it's not necessarily about someone's done something wrong. It's not always about that. It can be about just how the relationship is between the counsellor and the client, or sometimes even misunderstandings. So it's not necessarily about anyone doing anything wrong. Complaints could happen.
I would say as well, one of the things I've realised, and some of the counsellors that have been subject to the process have told me, is that actually it can be a huge learning experience as well. And, I think the point of the complaint process is not about punishment, that's not what it's there for. It's there to ensure that everybody feels heard, everybody's accountable for their actions, but also it's a huge learning process for counsellors as well.
Yes, and I hear there's a reflexive element to a complaints procedure, because part of, I guess, working through that is for therapists to consider what may they do differently, what may they take away from that, and what have they learnt. I guess brings me to the next question. What kind of complaints do you see coming in?
So we can't talk about actual complaints, but things around boundaries and competence come up quite a lot.
Yeah, and I would say things around introductions as well. So things as simple as introductions. So I think that's a really interesting one for listeners to think about is the first impressions they might make on a potential client. And that client will have come forward probably full of anxiety about contacting somebody, and the response they receive is quite important. So I've been relatively surprised by the number of inquiries I've had about introductions. So that's one thing I'll bring. But yeah, often it's about boundaries, competence to work in the field. So, for example, a counsellor that may have gone off and done 2 hours training on, I'm not saying this would happen, 2 hours training on couples therapy, couldn't then say I'm a couples therapist. It's about being competent in the room and knowing your subject and feeling confident with being a specialist, really.
Yes, and I think that's an interesting one. So you bring two very important points up. One is first contact. So when a client first reaches out to a therapist, there could be an issue there about how they're received, how they're welcomed, how the client's the therapist's professional persona, if you like, or professional way of working may sometimes be at odds with what the client's expecting. And the other is about competence, about, if you're advertising yourself as a trauma-informed practitioner, then there is a expectation that you would have done a training course that would allow you to be a trauma-informed practitioner, not maybe a £10 Groupon course or watching a few YouTubers off the internet.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that working within competence, we do, aside from the complaint side of things, we do often get questions from members saying, I really want to work with children and young people, or I really want to work with relationship counselling, or I really want to work with this particular thing. And I have X amount of training in it. And definitely, I would say that if you're going to work within a kind of specialist area, you need to make sure that you have had additional training in that, especially things like working with children and young people. Obviously, we have our children and young people's register, and relationship therapy, there is a separate register for that. So we would expect that people who are really looking to work in that area to have done specialist training, because the thing is that you don't know what you don't know, and you might think, oh, this is easy. I can already do, I've been a counsellor for 8 years and I'm really, really brilliant at person-centred counselling, and I can absolutely pivot into this particular area. And there are loads of things that your experience will help with, but there are really specific elements to relationship counselling and counselling children and young people and all of these kind of specialist areas, trauma, that you just don't get until you have got your brain into learning about it. Like I think I just said earlier, you don't know what you don't know, and there's so much to know about these specialist areas. Yeah, competence is a really big one, and I know I think we'll talk about that a bit more later, but it's not just in complaints, it does come up quite a lot in just general day-to-day running of society.
Yeah, for someone who is trained as a child therapist and as trauma-informed therapist, there is a lot you don't know. I have to say, my eyes were well and truly opened when I did my child training, and opened even wider when I did my trauma training. And I think there is an expectation now in terms of professional formation, a term I use sometimes to indicate how therapists develop their competencies, is that people will take a first trainings, could be person-centered therapy, and then they will move on and develop through CPD and other training other competencies, and I think that's kind of well founded now and well expected within our profession. So I guess the next question is, how can I avoid a complaint against me?
I mean, you can't avoid a complaint necessarily. These things come up even sometimes when you try your hardest. So I would say, if you are kind of worried about that kind of thing, don't overly worry about it. It's not something that you can avoid necessarily, but there are loads of things you can do to make sure that you are in the best possible position to avoid that kind of thing if it were to come up, but also so that if it does come up, you have all of the best possible, the best information, you've gone through best practice. So you know that if it does come up and someone wants to talk to you about a complaint, then you know how to deal with it, and you have the ability to provide your rationale for what's happened. The most important thing is to have a supervisor use your supervision. Anything comes up that you're not comfortable with, you're unsure about, take it to supervision. If you have a question about something, ask a supervisor. They should be your first port of call for anything that comes up in your counselling sessions that you're not sure about, or just anything. Lean on your supervisor.
And that kind of reflects back to what we were saying in the previous one about competency. It's also quite important that your supervisor is competent in the area that you are also exploring and going into to give you that sort of knowledge. I just want to link that back. Sorry, carry on, Meg.
Absolutely. That is really important, so that they can best support you then with what you're dealing with in your counselling sessions. So in addition to supervision, obviously you've got the society as part of this kind of triangle. So you've got your supervisor, you've got the society, you've got you. And so the society can help with ethical queries. We have our code of ethics, which any members should make sure that they're familiar with. I would say save it to your phone, or just make sure you've got it bookmarked so you can refer to it, because it's really important. Make sure you're, like we were saying before, working within your competencies. If you have a client come to you with something and you feel like it's not within your ability to work with and to do that competently, then talk about referring on, talk to your supervisor, see what support you can get. Perhaps it's something that you could do some research on. So, it's not necessarily not everything is going to be something you have to refer on if you can't deal with it, but maybe you could do your own research. Again, if you're not sure how to approach that, what level you should be doing, should you be referring on, should you be doing more research? Is there some training, brief training you can do? Talk to your supervisor. The other thing is to make sure that you have insurance.
Insurance is important. Yeah.
So for those of you that don't know, your insurance provider will provide you legal support, and they will also give you support in the event of a complaint against you. So if you have a query, especially if it's not really an ethical query, but it's more of a legal query, you can call your insurance provider and they will be able to help you with that. They have a legal team. It's a really strong resource that I don't think that many people know that they have it. Maybe I don't know if they don't shout about it, or maybe it's somewhere in a brochure, and who reads brochures about insurance? Personally, maybe I should, because who knows what's out there. I guess to recap, in summary, supervision, most important. Working within the code of ethics and knowing the code of ethics, really understanding that. Working within your competencies, making sure you've had the right training for specialist areas, and insurance. 4 things.
Yes, 4 things. Yes. And I think the interesting thing that I'm hearing, the one that's standing out for me, is about supervision, making sure your supervisor is competent in the area that you're working in, because how often in supervision do we get really rich insights into something by saying, I'm a work with trauma, and if I'm working with my supervisor, I will mention something, and she may very well say to me, have you thought about this, Rory? What about that? And that is what supervision is. I think it's sometimes forgotten that supervision is, the clue is in the name. It's supervision. Your supervisor should be seeing farther than you, because they should be a little bit further along the line, a little bit more trained, a little bit more experienced, to be able to offer you that support. And also, of course, insurance. And a word on insurance I'd say is I found my insurance company incredibly helpful when I've had instances of maybe the police asking for my notes, and I've been able to speak with my insurance company, and they've been very, 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 very supportive. And I've really kind of backed up what my ethical body told me, but it was something I could put in my notes and say, this is what I've done, to form what I call defensible decisions, so that you can say, if you ever call to account, you can say, well, this is what I did, this is what I thought about, and this is the actions I took, and a defensible decision. All very, very pertinent things to either avoiding a complaint or to, I guess, mitigate should a complaint come in, and you get an understanding of the process. So tell me a little bit more about the NCS complaints process.
Probably a really good idea for people to go and have a look at it on the website as well.
Yes.
So I'm going to tell you a bit about it. So if you have never read a complaints process before, you should go and read it. I don't know if everyone has to do it as part of their course. I know everyone has to have a look at an ethical, like a code of ethics or an ethical framework. And that's something that you have to do. But do you have to look at a complaints process? I don't know, but you definitely should. Because this is something, when you join a professional body, this is something that you're signing up to, right? So have a look at it, read it. But I will say that this complaints process that we have in place has been a process over a number of years of improving and refining. So it's really easy to follow. It's really transparent. It's evidence-based. Perhaps Rach can talk a little bit about consensual disposals, because it's not my particular area of expertise. Probably won't get too techie, but you can have a look. It's all in the complaints process. Everything is there that you need to know.
I'm happy to step in. So one of the things I think we get asked a lot is about how long people have to make a complaint. I could be asked that by either side, actually. And just to say, at the moment, the complaints process allows 3 years. So if somebody come to me about a complaint that's happened with practice that's happened in the last 3 years. So just to get that bit out of the way, to say what Meg has said and agree with that, the process itself, it's very hard to kind of sit here and explain it in one go. It is steps. You can just follow steps one by one, and it's something we can always kind of go back to. And when either party are confused, like I say, we're currently at step 2, so please check the complaints process and you will see the bits I'm looking at. One of the things that I think is different about our process is we have something called consensual disposal. So once a complaint has reached an assessment panel, so lots of stuff would have happened before that, we've got to an assessment panel. The assessment panel can make a decision. So I'm going to read it actually from the process rather than try and explain it, because I think it's probably better in the process. The job of the assessment panel is to ask the question, what would the outcome be if this went to a full independent complaints panel hearing and the independent complaints panel found the member had breached a code of ethics? So what we are doing with consensual disposal, the assessment panel has a look at it and says, I think a more formal panel would think this, and they would say these bits of the code of ethics have been breached, and as a sanction, this is the consequence. And then if the member agrees that that is the case, they can accept those findings, they can accept the offer of the consensual disposal and say, yeah, I'll complete that sanction, thus avoiding everybody have to go to a more formal panel, which I won't go into at this point because it gets very complex. But that is a consensual disposal as a way of ending the process, mutually agreeable. There's no plea bargain. It's, how would you explain it, Meg? Can't find the word.
So I would say that what it does is removes any unnecessary lengthening of the process for both the client and the therapist, because it's very, very stressful going through a complaints process for both parties.
Yeah.
So a client will perhaps have, they might be having to relive something that's made them potentially really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
The consensual disposal just allows that to happen before going to an independence complaints panel. I don't know if there's a slightly more condensed way of saying that.
Would it be summed up in that it offers a form of arbitration, maybe?
I wouldn't say arbitration, because they are looking to see what a formal panel would do.
Right.
But I suppose, and it is, there's not a plea bargain in here. It's what they think a panel would do, whether that be removal, suspension, write a report, get more supervision, whatever it is. it's the same as they think a more formal panel would do, but it literally just is about ending that process and saving that stress that is causing both the complainant and the registrant going through this process. That's the easiest way I can kind of explain
I
it.
think that is really clear, and I think that's so helpful for the listener out there to understand that there is a step maybe that can be dealt with in terms of consensual disposal. We will put a link to the complaints process in the show notes, so if anybody goes to the podcast, they can be able to see the show notes. And it just remains for me to say, Rachel King, Professional Conduct Officer, Meg Moss, Head of Policy and Public Affairs for the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Rory. It was a pleasure as always.
Thank you, Rory. Appreciate you coming on.
Big thank you to the National Counselling Society, to Meg Moss, to Rachel King, and to you, Rory. You reached out and you hold the interviews. You get the information that we need to hear. I'm very grateful for that. If you want to know more about the National Counselling Society, soon to be the National Counselling and Psychotherapy Society, the link is in the show notes of today's podcast. Go to counsellingtutor.com, click on the podcast tab, go to episode 261. All the links are there, and you can find out more information on that topic. This has been episode 261 of the Counselling Tutor Podcast.
Yes, we started off with theory and practice. We talked about assessment in counselling, and we looked at the pros and cons of using assessment tools and techniques within the counselling room. We moved on to practice today, where I interviewed Dara McLaughlin from Web Healer, talking about, is having a purpose-built website a better proposition than DIY? You must listen to that, and I think the answer to that is really clear. And then we went on to speak with Rachel King and Meg Moss at the National Counselling Society, unveiling and demystifying the process of professional conduct procedures. And as always, stay grounded and stay safe.
Take the stress out of your counselling studies and get the support of Rory and I by joining us in the Counselling Study Resource. Counselling Study Resource, or CSR for short, is the world's most comprehensive assignment guidance and study support resource for students just like you of counselling and psychotherapy. See how Counselling Study Resource can help you. Visit counsellingtutor.com. That's counsellingtutor.com.
Thank you for listening to the Counselling Tutor Podcast. Find the show notes for this episode on our website at www.counsellingtutor.com.